Welcome to IVF This, episode 30, Mom Guilt and IVF. Welcome to IVF This. I'm your host, Emily Ginn. I'm a mother to two beautiful and feral boys. I'm married to my favorite person in the world. I'm a social worker, a life coach, and an IVF warrior. I'm here to teach you how to manage your mind and emotions during your IVF journey, to break free from anxiety and regain control of your life, even in the midst of infertility. I'm going to teach you to say IVF this to how we think about, talk about, and experience infertility. Let's go. Hello, my beautiful friends. I am so excited to talk to you today. I do want to share a few things before we get started. Number one, if my voice sounds a little bit strained at times during this recording, it's because I'm going through a little bit of an asthma flare. My amazing podcast producer, Anthony, is going to make sure he cleans it up as much as possible, but I might sound a little out of breath or anything like that. I promise you, nothing's going wrong. This is just what Emily's lungs do sometimes, so it's totally fine. I want to share some listener love. I'm also going to tell you a little story about what's going on at our house, and then, of course, the topic for today, which is based on an influx of clients recently who are in pursuit of their second child. And that's why I wanted to talk about mom guilt and IVF, because this is something that's coming up a lot with my current clients and when I do mini sessions with other people. Now, I don't want you to stop it here if you are still working on your first kiddo, because the information that I'm going to share, as always, pertains to every other facet of our life, right? Just because I'm talking about something specific doesn't mean it can't be applied to everything else. So if I'm talking about mom guilt in IVF, you could easily substitute in guilt as a partner, guilt as an employee, guilt as a woman, guilt as a family member, right? It covers the broad spectrum of everything that we experience as women. So I don't want you to shut this off. So hang out with me for, another 20, 25 minutes and see what you can glean from this, even if you don't have any kiddos and mom guilt specifically doesn't pertain to you. I do want to remind you that the mini sessions that I talked about just a second ago are completely complimentary. It's 30 minutes of dedicated one-on-one coaching time. No purchase necessary kind of crap. In fact, we don't even talk about the logistics of working together on a mini session. We do the whole mini session, and then if you're interested in talking about what it would be like to work together, then we get on a totally different call, a consultation call, and we talk about logistics. So I don't want you to feel any pressure. If you really do just want to see what it's like to work with me, book one of those mini sessions. We get 30 minutes. You bring a topic that you want to cover, and we just get right to work. The listener love that I was talking about, let me just do that again because that's not fucking helpful. So the listener love that I wanted to share comes from Britt McMill, or that's her username at least. I found this podcast at the perfect time. Back in January, I was at the very beginning of my IVF journey, and I had so many questions. I read all of the blogs I could find, and I started searching for IVF podcasts when I stumbled upon this one. Emily is so relatable, and I can't put into words how much this podcast has helped me. Our very first round of IVF was unsuccessful, and this podcast was here for me at a very challenging time. Thank you for sharing, Emily, and helping others. This journey tends to be very lonely and alienating, and you helped me relieve some of that. Well, Britt McMill, you are more than welcome, my friend. I am beyond grateful that this work has helped you, and I'm very sorry to hear about your first round. Thank you for taking the time to rate and review this podcast, and I hope that the episodes continue to help you as you heal and maybe move forward with another cycle or take some much needed time off. It's entirely up to you, but you have me, my heart, and the heart of every listener with you right now. So recently, this podcast hit a pretty amazing benchmark. We've hit 10,000 downloads after doing this for 6 months. This is a huge feat considering this podcast is being grown completely organically. I don't do paid ads or anything like that. So it's basically me doing the podcasting thing, sharing it on my socials, and then everything else, literally everything else, is all of you beautiful people listening, sharing, recommending it, talking about it, all of the things. Anthony and I mentioned him. He's my amazing producer. He and I can put on a great show, right? 2 shows a night. We're awesome. And I love this podcast so much. but it would be just me talking into the universe without all of you. We never would have hit that milestone without you. So thank you. So since all of you listening are in this movement, this IVF movement, that we're changing how we talk about, think about, and experience infertility, I wanted to invite you guys to do a project with me, if you want. I've developed this, I guess you would call it a little card, like a postcard, that has my main podcast art on it, right? The picture of me, the description of the show, and a QR code that people can scan that will link them to the show so that they can listen. I've printed up a ton of these, and I'm starting to leave them in the waiting rooms around the fertility clinics in my area. I promise you I'm not just like creeping around or anything like that. I asked the front desk if I can leave them, and if they're good with that, then wonderful. I leave them and it's done. If they're not, no harm, no foul. It's totally fine. But if that is something you would like to be a part of as well, shoot me an email. hello@ivfthiscoaching.com. I can send you some of the cards and you can share them at your clinic. I got into this because I knew there was a different way to experience infertility. I knew that there was a different way we could do IVF, that there was a way that we could still love our lives and mostly ourselves through this journey. And this podcast is a huge part of that. You are a huge part of that. Let's keep changing the game, my beautiful friends. Okay, we're short of 10 minutes into this episode and I haven't even gotten to the meat of it. I'm so excited. Let's get to the topic at hand. Now, I mentioned this at the beginning of the episode, but just because I'm talking about mom guilt specifically doesn't mean that you can't get anything from this episode if you're still waiting on that baby. Mom guilt is a facet of our cultural expectations for women. It is all the standards, expectations, how we treat ourselves, all of those things. So even if you're still waiting for that beautiful baby, it doesn't mean this doesn't apply to you, I promise. This is something that has come up a lot, like I mentioned, over the last few months in my mini sessions, as well as several of my new clients. They're working on kiddo number 1, or, some of you know that I'm working on kiddo number 3, and having a lot of trouble navigating the responsibilities of kiddos, home, work, and IVF. Let's be honest, navigating the logistics and emotions of IVF itself is a challenge, let alone when we throw in any of the other things into the mix. But when I've talked a lot to people who are working on this in mini sessions, or my new clients, or myself, because I'm going to provide some examples from myself later on in the episode, I wanted to bring it on because it is something that's coming up. And if there's a theme that I notice when I work with my clients or when I'm doing my own self-coaching, I always want to make sure that I touch on it. That's where a lot of my concepts come from, because I think it's important to share, because if one of us is going through it, or a few of us, or I'm noticing a pattern, then that means that it's a global thing that we got to talk about. So here we are. I'm going to give you a few examples from some of the stuff I've recently heard. One IVFer was talking about how she has a 4-year-old who goes to daycare. She works full-time outside of the home. It's like a corporate role, I believe. And she is doing, or it now has done, 2 back-to-back banking cycles. And because of the physical exhaustion that comes into play with the hormones and everything, she is picking her little one up from daycare, coming home, putting on a show to watch while she lays on the couch to rest, maybe scrolling social media. Dinner is like a sandwich or something in the chicken nugget variety, because, toddler. By the time bedtime routine rolls around, mom has pretty much spent a couple of hours beating the crap out of herself for being a terrible mother, not being engaged. There might be some yelling, tears from both. And by the time the kiddo is in bed, mom is basically binge eating the pantry and continuing the cycle of beating herself up for being a terrible mom, going to sleep, and the vicious cycle just continues into the next day. Another example is of a mom of an 18-month-old little boy who has her at home. She works part-time from home, but fitting work in between naps and rest times and all of that. When she has doctor's appointments, because she's starting a cycle, her hubs will stay home in the morning and she goes to the clinic. When she has doctor's appointments, because she's starting her cycle, then her hubs will stay at home with the kiddo while she goes to those early morning monitoring appointments. She's had a few losses and at least one failed cycle. So she has already experienced a tremendous amount of anxiety in general when she goes for ultrasounds. But what happens is that she wakes up, rushes to get to those morning monitoring appointments because they have them at the butt-ass crack of dawn, races home to relieve dad, quote unquote, those are her words, and then is off to races with the kiddo for the day and work without even a moment to breathe. She's constantly putting out fires and doing all the things. She finds herself disconnecting from her kiddo, like she's telling herself that she has to be present, but she also doesn't really want to play with cars or games or all of that stuff. Her energy is low. Her patience is thin. And then it's the same song and dance. I'm not being a good mom. I'm not 100% present for my kiddo. I'm not making gourmet meals. The house isn't spotless. I'm trying to fit it all in and I just can't do anything right. Bear in mind that these are just 2 examples of how mom guilt plays in our lives. And then you add in the additional emotional weight of IVF and all of the thoughts that we have about ourselves and our lives during this process. And it is just so defeating for us. The biggest thing that I see with my clients is that we are physically with our kids, but our emotions and our brains are somewhere else. That's the theme. And guys, when I say with my clients, I'm throwing myself in there. I'm my own first client always. So this is true for me as well. We have this preconceived notion that if we are not 100% intentional and focused on those little creatures, then they are suffering because of it. Suffering. There is a sacrifice that those children are having to make on our behalfs because we can't, quote unquote, can't figure it out. It's not true. I promise you it's not true. But I'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute, but I want to make sure that I say it one more time. It's not true. Those little babies are not suffering. Your work is not suffering. Your marriage is not suffering because you're not 100% intentional and focused. I want to talk about why we're not mentally or emotionally there. One of the reasons it is so easy for us to disengage when we are with our children, or again, at work with our partner, you can sub in anything, when we're going through IVF is because of all the messaging around how we should be interacting with people, treating people, talking to them, etc. And this is very overwhelming when you are already experiencing the overstimulation of emotions and hormones that we have during an IVF cycle. That is why watching TV, doing chores, social media, eating, drinking alcohol feels easier. Because it is easier. You don't have to be emotionally invested. It's based on this idea that there is no space in the world for you as a person. The space is all taken up by kids, job, partner, family, friends, all of the other host of responsibilities that we have. It's the spinning plate analogy. We are conditioned to believe that all the plates have to spin exactly the same, perfectly, at all times. The first wobble, and well, that means shit's hitting the fan and we're terrible people. Never mind that we're trying to manage 10 plates at a time without giving ourselves a moment to reconnect with ourselves. For women, and this is me too, our default is to be disappointed in ourselves. Society tells us that we have to be sexy, thin, smart, successful, nurturing, look put together, house perfectly decorated and tidy, Pinterest and Instagram polished and ready. Bullshit. We got to be breaking ceilings and at home with dinner prepped and wearing pearls. Our children need to be straight A students, athletes, involved in extracurriculars, well-rounded, calm, attentive, even-keeled children. Impossible. These are impossible standards. Yet so many of us, with kids or not, fall victim to this. Fall victim to ourselves and these standards. Before we talk about how we can change this vicious cycle, before we can talk about changing anything, we have to be aware of and fix the obvious but rarely talked about problem, which is when you're working, when you're going through IVF, you feel guilty as hell and telling yourself that you're not a good enough mom. And we're so focused on what we need to achieve, this check these things off the to-do list in order to prove to ourselves that we are good enough. Except there's no metric for that. So our backs are always, always, always against the wall. I want you to think about this. There is never a stop for a celebration when we have completed something. It's just rolled right into the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. We think to ourselves, well, if I get this one thing done, then I'm going to feel better. Yeah, but that hardly ever happens, right? Even if we do feel a momentary lightness of having accomplished something, we don't celebrate it. We just roll right into the next thing and then feel that old familiar stifle. That's why so many of us feel so depleted all of the time. That's why so many of us turn to food, alcohol, social media, Netflix. Like if you're doing these things and beating yourself up from the inside out every single day for how bad of a mom you are, how bad of an employee you are, how bad of a partner you are, how bad of a person you are, I mean, there is no relief. Most of us think we use food, alcohol, all of these things as a relief from our lives. But what most of us never realize is that we are seeking relief from ourselves. The relief from how we talk to ourselves. The relief from how we treat ourselves. This is the mental stuff that I focus on. This is the mindset coaching that I believe is so impactful. Until we can rein in our asshole brain and start having different conversations with ourselves, then nothing's going to change. But here we are. What do we do? What do we do when we are working, having these little humans, have relationships, our significant others, all of these things? How do we navigate these things and IVF? Compassion. You knew it. I knew it. That was what we were going to say. Compassion is everything. Compassion for yourself is literally the key to peace in your life. In both of the scenarios that I described to you earlier in the episode, I could give you 15 more that have very similar elements, and they always lack compassion. These women, like most women, have zero compassion for themselves. How many times have you heard, suck it up, buttercup, put your big curl panties on and deal with it? Other people have it worse. Like, I say shit like that to myself too. But unless you're acutely aware of your thoughts, unless you are actively self-coaching, it can be nearly impossible to divorce these colloquialisms from how we actually talk to ourselves. In other words, you can't see them as the cliches they are because you still see them as the truth. Like if you really believe that you just need to roll your sleeves up and deal with it, then the moment you experience any emotion that is contrary to, focus, drive, discipline, motivation, then you will automatically make that mean something terrible about you, that you can't handle everything, that you're not doing it right. One of the things that I have had to do, because y'all, I have done a lot of work on myself, is that I had to get okay with the fact that my brain was going to be very disappointed in me. I know that sounds so strange, but so much of my default thinking is around, you're not doing enough, you're not accomplishing enough, you're not spending enough quality time with your kids, you're not spending enough quality time with your husband, you're not doing enough in your business, you are just not enough. These are the thoughts that I have regularly. Like when I tell you guys that even as a coach, I am still human, I mean it. These are daily thoughts for me. Very often, I get incredibly frustrated with my kiddos. Sometimes I snap at them. Sometimes I open my phone and scroll so I don't have to talk about things like bugs or dinosaurs or sports or whatever the heck those nonstop chatterboxes are talking about. And it doesn't mean that I don't love them and I'm not completely dedicated to being their mom. I sometimes pray for bedtime because I am human. I've gotten much better over the years at recognizing these types of thinking and kind of playing those thoughts out to knowing what happens, like putting them into a think, feel, do cycle. Usually any one of those thoughts, I will feel like a failure, defeated, depressed, anxious, and then I don't do any of the things that I might actually want to do. I've gotten more comfortable with this idea of it's okay if my brain is disappointed in me. Remember, I talk a lot about how to lovingly talk to yourself. And that's a lot of what I do. I literally talk to my brain. Like, I get that that's what you think, brain. But when you tell me anything with enough in the sentence, I don't really know what that means. But I can tell you that I'm doing this and this and this and this. Right? I don't have to argue with the thoughts. It doesn't have to go away. It's not a terrible thing that they're there. I just offer a different perspective and my brain quiets down. Now, sometimes this is a bit like Brian Fantana from Anchorman. 60% of the time it works every time. No, I mean, it works more than that, but it's not 100%, right? Nothing in life is 100%. But it certainly quiets down the BS chatter in my brain. I remember when I used to feel defeated or disappointed in myself because I didn't have any better thinking about my life, my kids, or my career. As though I was supposed to only have rainbow daisy, happy thoughts about all of the aspects of my life all of the time. Otherwise, I was doing it wrong. Let me tell you one of the most helpful thoughts I have ever heard. Now, it doesn't come from me. It came from a coach of mine that I know. And it's not specific to being a mom, although that's where I tend to use it. But again, sub in the mom part of anything, any area of your life that you feel guilty in. But the thought is, what if this is mothering? What if mothering looks like turning on a show when you get home from daycare so that you can take 20 minutes to yourself? To decompress, journal, pee, take 2 damn breaths before throwing yourself into that second shift. No cleaning, no meal prep. 20 minutes is not going to make or break your household. What if mothering looks like parking your car at a gas station down the road and listening to a quick podcast, a meditation exercise, or just sitting in silence to give yourself some space to process your latest doctor's appointment? What if being a partner looks like telling them exactly what you need in that moment so that they can support you, rather than doing what you think you should be doing and being miserable the entire time, and then they're probably miserable too. Like maybe you guys had plans to go out to dinner and your bones are aching because you are so tired. And the thought comes like, but I don't want to disappoint them if we don't go. What if that person who loves you so much would be much more disappointed to know you went and tried to force yourself to have fun rather than trusting them with knowing what you actually need? What if being a good employee looks like calling in the day after a negative beta or anything? Seriously, no company or organization is going to go belly up because you took a day off to mourn, grieve, and process, rather than, again, forcing yourself to go into the office or sit on calls completely disconnected, unfocused, and unproductive. We spend so much time thinking about what we owe to other people, literally to everyone else, but we never stop and spend any time thinking about what we owe to ourselves. Turn that mirror onto yourself. This isn't a you can't pour from an empty cup cliche. This is we are teaching and modeling to our beautiful children, our future children, boys and girls alike, that we are less important than everyone else, that our needs, our pain, our experience in this world is less important than, well, everybody. You have the right to be present for yourself in the same way you desire to be present for your kids. You have the right to advocate for yourself in the same way that you desire to advocate for your loved ones. And you have the right to choose yourself in the same way you choose other people. This is my beautiful hope for all of you. And this is what I have for you this week. Until next time, remember, you have got this. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of IVF This. If you like what you've heard, click subscribe and follow to make sure you don't miss an episode. And if you want to learn more, head over to www.ivfthiscoaching.com to learn how to work together.